So thank you everybody for joining us. My name's Jo Holmes. I run an organisation called GENI, which stands for Greening the Economy of the North East of England. We've got some support through Gateshead Council to deliver some sessions. Just let me go away. We've so Gateshead Council have recognised that, sorry, I'm just trying to move my slides on. Can you see the next slide? Is that moved on?
Not, it's gone back to the screen now, Jo.
Sorry. I wish I was more technically minded on this.
There you go. That's back on there now. You want to put it from current slide on the slideshow.
Yeah.
Then we'll get the.
Is that doing it?
It's not done it on. It's not gone on to your slideshow. It's still showing it in editable format.
I think it's because I've got two screens and it confuses it. Sorry.
We're off now.
Right. I'll try again. Right, is that doing it now?
Yeah, that's it. We're there.
And has it moved it on?
It's on the opening slide at the minute.
Oh, for goodness sake. I'm so sorry. I'll try again, sorry. I don't know how to get rid of that screen.
Right, so if you do from beginning or current slide.
It's not doing it, is it?
No.
I'm so sorry, everybody.
Do you want to, what if you quickly send them to me, Jo, and see if I can share screen and populate
Right. I'll do that. Sorry, this is a nightmare. Attach. Right, I've sent you that. If you could put that up, that would be great. Right, so I'll just say it anyway, but we've got some funding through Gateshead Council to help inform businesses in Gateshead and Gateshead supply chain businesses about environmental management, carbon, and what they've got to be ready for, what's coming their way. There are businesses on the Team Valley and Gateshead at the minute who can't get flood insurance. So that's all to do with climate change that's happening now. It's not something in the future. So we've developed 5 webinars in the series that are going to cover, not in depth, but an overview of all the different topics that you need to start thinking about and preparing for as businesses. And we're also doing one-to-one support. So if you wanted to talk about your unique business, because everybody's different, what you can do, you can book a half an hour or an hour slot, and you can talk to somebody and talk about your unique business. So Greening the Economy of Gateshead is part of a GENI delivery, and GENI delivers investors in the environment in the northeast of England. So Investors in the Environment is a nationally recognised accreditation system for an environmental management system. By managing your environmental impacts, it makes good business sense. You can save money, you can demonstrate to your customers that you are doing the right thing. You can demonstrate to financial bodies that you're managing your risk. So it just makes really good business sense that if you're managing your environmental impacts. What's also coming is A lot of financial institutions, a lot of funding organisations, and a lot of larger businesses are now starting to put some pressure on their supply chain and customers about and asking them questions about what are they doing about their environmental impacts. So, for example, Newcastle Hospital Trust has set a target that they won't buy off any business that doesn't have a net zero target by 2030, and they're currently talking about whether to bring that down to 2025, which is not a long time away. So customers, suppliers, they're all going to start asking businesses for this information, for evidence of what they're doing about their environmental impact. So it makes good business sense to start looking at it now, being a bit more proactive rather than reactive. So having an environmental policy, having an action plan in place, being aware of what your carbon footprint is, being aware of what carbon is. So that's what today's about. So we work very closely with SmartCarbon, who's going to talk to you about climate change today. And SmartCarbon is a brilliant tool that helps you measure your carbon footprint. So anything that's slightly more complicated than a simple spreadsheet, we would always refer them to SmartCarbon, who takes them through the process. I'm sure Lee will tell you about that today. So I'm going to pass over to Lee. He'll be able to do technical things far better than me.
Well, let's hope. I mean, all I've got to do, Joe, thank you, is to switch this over from onto here. Right, so hopefully you can see that. So this is going to be a whistle-stop tour, I suppose, of what's happening with the climate crisis. I've left enough time, I think, for questions at the end, but if things come up as we go through, then maybe you can put things on the post questions on the chat, and I'll ask you, Joe, if you keep an eye on that, and then I'll answer those as we go along. In terms of who I am, I'm commercial director at SmartCarbon. Come on to that in a moment, what we do. I'm also co-founder of an organisation called Cactus, which is Climate Action for Corporate Travel, Urgent Sustainability. A lot of letters, we just wanted it to say Cactus, to be honest with you. So that's for getting people to do something about their corporate travel. I'm a community trainer over here in Cumbria with Climate Action, Cumbria Action for Sustainability, and an associate member of IEMA, Institute for Environmental Management and Assessment. SmartCarbon, we focus on carbon emissions calculation, reporting, and reduction. So we run courses through Northumbria University, which is kind of step one, where people commit to undertake action through that initial learning. Then we provide a technical platform that allows people to easily calculate their emissions and report them. And then step three is that we work with organisations then to put in place plans for reducing their impact. And we do that. We were kind of started at just under 10 years ago in the Northeast. So a lot of the organisations that we work with are based in the Northeast, as you'll see on here. But increasingly, and certainly over the last year, we work with a lot of national organisations as well. So we've got a wide range of clients. So the purpose of this session really is to talk about the climate crisis, and I suppose it's not the most uplifting session you'll ever be part of, especially if it's your lunch hour. But I can't really change that. This is as it says here, a reality check, and therefore we can only talk about the reality as is. So these first few slides are pretty much almost like a quiz. So either talk up or answer on on chat what you believe the answers are to these questions. So first of all, in terms of climate change, we talk about these points of reference. So first of all, we talk about the greenhouse effect. So can someone offer what they believe the greenhouse effect is, by all means speak up or put it in the chat.
I'm not sure.
Not sure?
No, I don't.
Is it
No?
that there's so much pollution that it's causing the heat to remain around the Earth?
That's a really good. That's really close to actually what is happening. Thank you. I mean, that pollution, actually, we'll come on to what that pollution is. In effect, it's gases when we say pollution. So if you look at, so first of all, the first thing we have to recognize is that the greenhouse effect is actually positive, because what happens is the sun's radiation comes towards the earth, and about half of it is reflected or absorbed by clouds and then out of the atmosphere, and the rest reaches the earth, and the earth then releases that heat back towards space. Some of it passes directly through the atmosphere, but importantly, some of it is captured and retained by what we've just described as being pollution. It's actually retained by what we call greenhouse gases. And those greenhouse gases in our atmosphere mean that we retain a sufficient level of the sun's energy and heat, particular heat, so that we maintain, and I'll come on to this again, that we maintain a certain level of warmth on our planet that enables us to maintain life on Earth as we know it and as we've known it for hundreds of thousands of years in actual fact. So the greenhouse effect is the effect whereby a number of gases retain the sun's heat and therefore maintain a certain level of temperature on the planet. So then the next question is, so if that's what the greenhouse effect is, then what is global warming? That's a simpler question.
Is it everything just getting hotter?
It is. It is.
Melting.
Yeah, it is exactly that. So when we talk about global warming refers to the average temperature across the planet, and if you like, that increasing and getting warmer. So what you're looking at there is that all those bars represent, I don't know how much, I don't think each bar is a year, but it's probably, you know, a couple of 2 to 3 years. So if that starts off at 1850 and it goes up to 2020, and that's the average temperature across the planet. And so, you know, the average temperature was at the beginning of, you know, before we had the Industrial Revolution, round about 0 on average across the world. And then, as you can see, over that period of time, 170 years, it's gone up to a point where now we're up to 1.2 degrees warmer than these pre-industrialized times. So when we're talking about global warming, we're talking about the increase in average temperature across the world, and it's unequivocal in terms of the extent to which that has risen. So greenhouse effect is the gases that maintain the warmth around the planet. Global warming is the increase in the average temperature over time across the world. So then what's climate change? Because that tends to be what we talk about, climate change. What is climate change? Probably the
effect
most
on
obvious.
seas and deserts.
Say again, sorry?
The effect on seas and deserts and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the effect of if the climate changes, then you can end up with a desert. Is certainly what can happen. So climate change, if you think about, we just looked at how the average temperature has changed over 150 years. The climate is actually the, if you like, the weather system that you would expect at any particular part of the world. So, if you went to the Nordic countries in last month in February, you'd expect the climate to be very, very cold. And in fact, probably freezing. If you went to the Canary Islands at this time of year, then you expect the climate to be very warm, and other parts of the Mediterranean as well. So the change in climate and climate change is the change in it's the change in the conditions within a particular any particular environment on the planet, which is a result of that average temperature warming. So climate change is a change in the actual climate and the weather conditions that will happen in any particular part of the world due to the, if you like, the temperature getting warmer. So that's what we mean when we talk about climate change. So final question, and this is going to be a long answer probably in about 30 slides, but this kind of leads into the conversation. So what do we then believe as being when we talk about the climate emergency? So what are we talking about?
The fact that people are going to be displaced and they won't be able to live with the temperatures, because the temperatures and the loss of land and the extreme weather events will mean that life can't continue in many parts of the world.
Yeah, I think that's a really good synopsis. The climate emergency is that we've got to a point where we have destabilized those climate and weather conditions that have allowed us to maintain life on Earth for humankind and most other species, and therefore we're at a point of crisis in terms of those conditions. So let's go through that in a bit more detail. I think that last description is really accurate in terms of what the emergency is. That we're at a point. If you think about it, an emergency is a point in time where you have to do something right now. Right at that moment in time is when you get to an emergency. Hence, when you see an ambulance racing down the road, everybody else stops so that it can get through, because it's, an emergency it's something that you have to provide a remedy for now. And therefore the climate emergency is the climate has got to a point where if we don't reverse the climate impacts, then clearly we're going to be at a point whereby we can't actually maintain a livable planet. So why have we got an emergency? So let's just go back to the greenhouse effect again. So this is a good comparison in terms of the greenhouse effect. So there you've got Earth and you've got Venus. Venus is closer to the sun, so you'd expect Venus to be much hotter. The Earth has got an atmosphere. If you take those greenhouse gases, they exist in an atmosphere which is 11 kilometers thick. Venus has got an atmosphere which is about 150 kilometers thick, and as a result of that, you've got average temperature for the Earth of 15 degrees centigrade, and no surprise, Venus is so much closer to the sun, about over 450 degrees centigrade, just unlivable. However, what's interesting and just points to how important the atmosphere is, Mercury is much closer to the sun, but it has a very, very thin atmosphere and therefore no protection. So it's much colder than Venus because of the lack of its ability to retain heat within the atmosphere. And so that 11 kilometers of atmosphere around the Earth maintains, if you like, has helped us to maintain that livable planet. However, we now have a problem insofar as those greenhouse gases, the most prevalent of those is carbon dioxide, and we have more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere now than at any time in the last 800,000 years. And you will hear people who might be skeptical about this, still surprising, but you'll still have people that say, well, it's gone up and down. Temperature's gone up and down, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have gone up and down. Well, you can see that they've gone up and down over 800,000 years there. And this is from NASA, so pretty reliable data. And over that time, if you look at where the current level is, we now have almost 415 particles per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that is the highest for 800,000 years. So it's completely unprecedented. Then if you come a little bit kind of closer to home and you ask the question, well, it goes up and down. Well, let's look at this. This is known as the Keeling curve. This was created by a guy called John Keeling at the beginning of the 60s, when they first, well, let's say we really started to take note that something was changing. That number here of 280 is the particles per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So what you're looking at there is over the last 2,000 years. So for the last 2,000 years, we've had about 280, give or take, and it's almost a flat line. It's been the same. It's just maintained these conditions, which we've all been able to enjoy and grow food, and species have been able to survive, and it hasn't changed until, of course, we then had the kind of industrial revolution and started to put more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And you can see the blue line here is the temperature, and as you can see, in line with the increase in greenhouse gases, the temperature then has increased alongside that. Also of interest, if you were to project that red line back another 8,000 years to the last ice age, it would continue as a flat line. So when you ask the question, well, as many people do, well, why haven't we done anything about this? For a long time, people questioned whether, is it really down to humans? Are we really making the difference? And if you think about it, you got a long line for the last 10,000 years to last ice age, and then all of a sudden it goes straight up alongside the activities of the Industrial Revolution and the increase in temperature. And there you go. That is exactly what we've done. Whoops, wrong way around. So we first started to realise at the turn of the last century, there were some people saying there might be something happening here. We're putting a lot of coal. We're burning a lot of coal, and we are potentially changing, or could change in the future, the average temperature on the planet. And then as we've got further along, and we've seen this exponential growth in the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we've had meeting after meeting. We set up the IPCC about 30 years ago. We've had various protocols. We've come onto the Paris Agreement. We've had all these warnings, and yet we've continued to see this exponential growth till such a point where, at the moment, and we'll come back to this, at the moment, we're putting about 45 gigatons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere every year, and that continues to increase the average temperature on the planet. And this is how we're doing it. So if you think about the basics here, what have we done? We've had for the last 170 years, we've had some energy sources that no human beings have ever been able to call upon before us. And fundamentally, they've been coal, and they've been an oil, and also gas. But so we've mined coal, and we've mined oil, and we've then used those to then, if you like, those energy sources to then change how we live. So we've then mined the coal, they've gone into coal plants, we've used them in generation of electricity, and then and ultimately we've then got those fossil fuels then driving emissions and greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere. So you've got your coal plants, we've got industrial processes, so we've been able to power industrial processes to make things. We've been able to power how we move, whether we're flying, whether we're driving ourselves, whether we're moving goods. We've been able to do that on the back of these fossil fuels, and all of these activities, of course, are then putting more of these greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere. In addition to that, because of these processes, we've also then changed how we actually eat and how we live our lives. So we've, you know, through having access to more and more mechanization, we've been able to take down and more quickly forests to allow more grazing land for agriculture. So we've changed our diets. We've burned down forest to enable more space again for to sustain those diets. We've wasted more, so we've created these kind of landfill areas for all of that waste, and that they have an impact as well. So we've got all those activities putting more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and as a result of that, I'm going to finish here on one of the things that we're doing is, as we know, we are heating up the world through all of those activities, and we've talked about carbon dioxide so far as being the biggest of the greenhouse gases, the most prevalent. There is another greenhouse gas, the second most prevalent greenhouse gas is methane, and methane is generated through ruminant animals such as cows and sheep. So they burp and deposit methane. Methane is almost 30 times as powerful as carbon dioxide in its warming capability. So a huge issue, and becoming more and more of an issue. It's also emitted through landfills, but predominantly the way that we've changed our diet is driving a huge amount of methane. Methane is also deposited in landmass, and in particular in the permafrost. So you think about areas like the Arctic, and around the Arctic, you have literally got billions of tons of methane which have remained frozen for millennia. And as the planet gets warmer, then that starts to melt the permafrost. And this then leads even more to why we've got a climate emergency, because if we warm as the planet gets warmer, we warm the permafrost releases methane. The methane then makes it warmer still, and all the time you're releasing, and so you have kind of a feedback loop going on there from that, and that adds to our issue, and that's why we have to act really quickly, because that dynamic is going on right now. What does that mean in terms of those activities that we've talked about? How do they all play out? So in terms of where we are creating those greenhouse gases, and you think about what you do and the jobs that you do, so about 3/4 of the greenhouse gas issue that we have is through energy, through creating energy. And of course, we need energy for all these things that we do. whether we're transporting ourselves, warming ourselves, making things, it's all down to energy. About a quarter of the greenhouse gas emissions are driven by how we use our land and how we feed ourselves. So about a fifth, in actual fact, is driven by how we feed ourselves and therefore how we use land to feed ourselves. And then industrial processes, so cement and use of chemicals is driving a small amount, 5%. And actually our waste, although it has really toxic implications on life, you know, but through landfill and then wastewater, there's a small amount of emissions coming through those activities. But this helps to guide where we need to put our efforts, because one of the things we'll come on to in these sessions that Joe's got lined up is we'll talk about a hierarchy of activity. And if you think about it, you know, where we look to recycle, it's helpful, but it's small. And where we really need to concentrate our effort is in reducing our energy usage, and therefore reducing all those the use of fossil fuel generated activity that we're relying upon for our energy, because that's 3/4 of where this problem lies. And then equally, how we use land is also critical. So I'm going to come back to that reference to permafrost earlier, and again, why this is an emergency. You know, this is an example from 2018 of where the average temperature is going up across the globe, but there are some spots on the planet where the increase is even greater, and one of them are the Arctic regions. So you've got an example there where it was 28 degrees hotter than normal, 2018. If I go back to the permafrost, these are the areas that we can least afford to warm up to that degree, because of course that's where all the methane lies. And so in terms of an emergency, we absolutely have to bring this right back, because it's the Arctic regions that are warming up at 3 times the rate than the rest of the planet, and we cannot afford that to happen. How does this then play out in terms of our impact in our being able to manage our complex societies and our world? Well, as one of you mentioned earlier, in terms of, you know, what is climate change? Climate change is the change in how the climate in any given part of the world is, and how the weather conditions are in any particular region. And so what you can see here, and this came from one of the insurers who have to try and insure against catastrophic events. If I think about my own lifetime, you know, in 1980, I was 17 years old, just leaving school. From then, compared to now, the incidence of extreme weather events has changed by a factor of 5 during that time. And if you, and the trajectory that we are on means that this, for you know, people who are 17 now, means that this will be the lowest incidence of those kind of events that they will ever remember. So that's all changed by a factor of 5, and whether it's droughts, fires, floods, or storms, this is how it's all playing out. And of course, we have to try and manage our lives and manage our societies alongside all those things going on. And therefore, areas such as the NHS, that's why they're putting so much focus on the climate crisis and the climate emergency, because they have to try and cope with what is the new norm. What we're looking at here is the normal in terms of expectations of those kind of events. Ultimately, it's the biggest to the global economy. And, you know, many people, you know, whether they're coming on to this session or they're joining one of our courses, and, you know, you have your individual businesses and day-to-day activities to care about and to think about, you think, well, do I really want to turn my attention to this right now? Is it relevant for me? The reality is that this is the biggest threat to all of our lives and to actually the future of our businesses, because we cannot continue with our processes given the changes that we have now and that are coming our way. And this is now, you know, unquestioned. You have, in fact, it's closer to 99%. From a couple of years ago, but, you know, over 97% of research papers basically agreeing, these are scientific research papers saying that, you know, human-induced climate change is actually happening. And if you put that in perspective, then if 97% of engineers said, don't go across that bridge if it's going to collapse, would you be listening to the three? And it's, you know, we'd be pretty sure that, you know, we listen to experts when it suits, and we really need to now listen to what the climate scientists are telling us in terms of the action that we need to take. And we are taking some action. You know, we had the Paris Agreement in 2015, where you had almost 200 companies agreeing that we needed to take action. And as a result of that, you know, there was widespread agreement that we would keep the temperature increase below 2 degrees centigrade, but we actually needed to pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5. And since then, we've had IPCC papers which have said, you know, when we looked at that last graph of all the floods, the droughts, the fires, all those extreme weather events that we are struggling to cope with, what we agreed was we really need to keep it now below 1.5, otherwise they're going to get beyond control. And we agreed that we would look at this every 5 years, and that all nations would then increase their ambition in line with that. So 5 years was right in the midst of the pandemic. That delayed things by a year, and of course we had COP26, and that was the first point at which we reviewed all those activities, and the idea was to increase our ambition. At which point we had the IPCC report, which basically said we're now at a point of code red. We have no time left, basically, to increase that ambition. This is important to recognise when we talk about that ambition. So, as at the beginning of 2021, the remaining carbon budget for, and to be clear on this, 50% chance. So to have 50% chance of keeping the temperature below 1.5, we could afford to put 460 gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Now, if you remember, when I showed you on an earlier graph, we're putting in about 45 a year at the moment. So that gives you 10 years. That gives you 10 years, and 10 years gives you a 50% chance of holding it to 1.5. So then, if you want a better chance than that, so for either a 66% chance, which is not great, 2/3, or 83%, then actually we've got to limit the amount of CO2 we put into the atmosphere to either 360 or even less than that, 260. And 260 gives us just short of 8 years. This is the point that we're at now, where when people talk about the climate emergency and the climate crisis as being something that will affect and impact future generations, we've actually now got less than 8 years to do what we need to do. This is the the activities that we need to undertake and the cuts that we need to take are actually right now. I will warn you, going to come on to probably the worst slide of them all in a moment, but in terms of where we are at the moment, our warming is at about 1.2, and the goal of course we're still trying to achieve is to keep the warming below 1.5. But the pledges and targets we have in place at the moment, this is people just saying, look, this is what we're going to do, this is what we intend to do. That's going to take us at a medium level to over 2 degrees centigrade of warming. Possibly that's at a medium. It could be as high as 3 from that's just from the pledges, of course, or down at 1.9. But our current policies and what we're doing at the moment means that we could get to as high as 3.9 degrees of warming by the end of the century, given what we're doing at the moment, and certainly around 3. So we're on track for around 3, the way that we're going, and the most optimistic targets will take us to 2. So here's a really sobering picture for anyone who's either a lot younger than me or has got children or grandchildren who are going to expect to be alive towards the end of this century. This is a model of what the Earth would look like if it's 4 degrees warmer than it is now. All the areas in yellow are uninhabitable due to extreme weather events. The areas in brown are uninhabitable due to the ones in yellow are uninhabitable due to extreme heat, and those in brown are uninhabitable due to extreme weather events. Those areas in green have warmed up slightly and are the areas where you could still grow food. The important takeout, of course, from this, okay, this could be this, let's say it's the end of the century, but the reality is if all of this is uninhabitable, then where are 7.8 billion people going to live? And if this is at 4 degrees, then what does it look like at 3? Because at 4, we're talking about Spain, Portugal, Mediterranean area of France, Italy. You think about all those massive populations, in Africa, all become displaced. And the only areas of the world where realistically you can grow food and support human life is what you've got there in green. And we really can't afford to go there, but of course that is where we are going at the moment. And I guess the point which is why we undertake sessions like this and we're still having these conversations, is that it's not that we haven't, if we've got 8 years to undertake the action that we need to take, then it's not unprecedented for either our nation or multiple nations to come together and undertake emergency activity, which of course is what is required. We managed to put, in response to that space program, the US managed to get someone onto the moon within a decade. We've seen in the past how nations have come together in relation to emergencies such as the Second World War, and the willingness for the entire nation to take on extreme measures such as food rationing in response to those challenges. And then equally, most recently, we've seen how the nation came together in response to the pandemic, and many of you may have seen this representation in terms of the pandemic versus what's coming with climate change. So it's not entirely unprecedented. It is in terms of the scale of it, but we have responded to emergencies before, and that's exactly what we need to do now. And of course, there are many preeminent scientists and experts and reporters that are adding their voice to this call to respond to the fact that we are now on the verge. Well, we are destabilizing the entire planet, and this is about the next 8 years. The decisions that we make and what we do in the next year, the next 8 years, will basically determine whether younger people and future generations have a livable planet to enjoy the kind of lifestyles that people in my generation have seen for the past 4 to 5 decades. So that's it. We've got 8 years. That's why kind of being asked to look at what you can do within your own business and your own lifestyles. Not the most uplifting lunch break, I'm sure, but we did say it was a climate reality check, and that is the reality as matters stand. So I will stop sharing there, and I've left some time for questions. Got just over 10 minutes for questions if there are any, or even just some thoughts having had to listen to that over your lunch break.
Emily's got a question.
Yes, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, a comment because of where we are, the area. I remember going to an exhibition, photographic exhibition of old Gateshead at St Mary's once, and they were very proudly saying that really we were the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, which, isn't quite so happy to think about now. And I'm really glad that on the other side of things, people like you in the area are at the forefront of of the green economy and trying to get people to be greener. But I wondered if any of you had seen it. I just saw it yesterday because Leslie Mountain of Twig posted it on our Gateshead Community Climate Alliance page. The report from, I think they're called the Climate Emergency Group, something like that. I can let you have it, where they have basically taken council's plans, their environmental plans, and marked them. And although when we set up that group, we were told by a councillor that Gateshead was leading the way, we're not. The average mark was 50%. Manchester, I think, was top with 85%. And we had 16%. We were 8th from bottom. There were people who were below the bottom who didn't even have a plan. Lots of councils who don't. But, we were horrified, but not actually that surprised. But how can they boast things like that when they're not doing that well? And what can we do about it? Because in politics, I mean, when we set up the group, it was apolitical, but it was picked on immediately by the councillor saying, oh, it's the Greens, the Greens, the Greens, which, it wasn't. It was a mixture. So what can we do to actually get the council to realize? I mean, that I haven't had any responses yet. I'm waiting because some of the councillors are friends of mine on Facebook, but probably they're not surprised either, my friends. And I'm not sure whether I should actually tag the council, because we would like a response, but I think it'll be defensive, and that doesn't get us anywhere. Okay, that's enough. I'll mute now.
I can't speak on behalf of the council, but I can say that they have set a climate emergency. They've declared a climate emergency, and they are looking at all their activities and they are addressing it. And they are accredited through Investors in the Environment, which goes for continual improvement, so they're looking to reduce everything year on year. As with anything with what the council's doing, and again, I'm not speaking on their behalf, what I would say is they are so tied with their budget restrictions, with, you know, they've got to deliver social services and all the plethora of other things they've got to deliver as well as this. And although, yes, as it is, I've heard this presentation so many times now, and it really depresses me every time I hear it, but it is something we need to get across, because it is just so important, and I just don't think people realise just how little time we have to act. But I think we've all got to do things individually and not just wait for councils or government or anybody to do it for us. We all have to act, and that goes for us as individuals, but it also goes for us as companies, organisations, community groups. Whoever it is, we've all got to do something, and we've got to do it now.
I think thanks, Jo. I think there's a couple of things that come out there. I mean, it doesn't surprise me that Manchester are where they are, because Manchester's home to the Tyndall Centre for Climate Research, and I think they've been involved in those plans, so they might be a little bit better informed due to that, possibly. So that's not a surprise. When you looked at those, if you look at those pledges from some of the slides, and you look at the gap between where we are as nations versus where we need to be, it's no surprise that if we're at that gap as nations, we're going to be at the same gap as you come down through society and into the regions as well. And actually, I think one of the things that we see happening at the minute, because like Jo, we're working with local authorities and we're working with lots of areas of industry as well. And we're starting to get to a point now where we're seeing what needs to be done, and we're seeing what the likely cost is. And we're I mean, you've got to be careful. I find I've got to be careful with this stuff, because it can be so political. It's a business, you can't get into politics. However, you know, you're seeing some reaction against the government's net zero targets now from certain parts of politics, because we're getting to that crunch moment where I think the councils are realizing what they need to do to actually hit targets like 2030. Industry's realizing what they need to do in order to be able to support the local authorities to do that. And so you're actually getting to a point where, as that moment of realization, where this is what it's going to cost. And so on one side, we've got people trying to push back against net zero, but actually, we actually are going to get to a point now, I think, within the local authorities where the cost of doing this becomes absolutely real. And I think the best that we can do as individuals, and I'm involved in it over here in Cumbria, is to push for the things that we need to do, and to push council, to push our representatives to do what we need to do, and so that we have to face that bump in the road, and we have to face that bump in the road, and we have to get past it. And if that means calling on national government for more funds or whatever it is, we have to face that bump in the road now, because it's there, it's real, and it's coming to light through industry and local authorities realizing now what needs to be done.
Yeah. Yeah.
I must say, I came into this a bit blind. Like, my knowledge of this whole thing is basic, but it's definitely eye-opening. I think everybody should see that presentation. It was I had no idea it was that bad, and it's terrifying. So no, I think it's amazing. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Alice.
Well, I'm going to attempt to share my screen again. Has that worked? Has it worked?
Yeah.
So just to finish off, just to let you know that we've got 4 more webinars, and they're going to cover all different topics. The next one Lee's going to cover for us again, and we're going to look at how you can measure your carbon footprint, because that's the next stage. You can't manage what you don't measure. So we've got to measure your carbon footprint, see where you're at now. And if you are going to set a carbon neutral goal or a net zero goal or however many reduction goal, you need to know where you are now to how you get there. We're going to cover environmental management systems and all different practical ways, and we want to do it really user friendly, no jargon, and how you can reduce your organisation and your individuals' environmental impacts, which includes your carbon footprint. And also I'd say again, you can book one-to-one support, so you can have a chat individually with myself about your organisation, and we can look at all the different practical ways. And generally speaking, when you reduce your environmental impact, you also reduce your costs, so it's good, makes good business sense. So that's it. Thank you so much for attending. And if you've got any questions or you want to contact me separately, my email address is there. Just let me know. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.